Susan, hello.
Good morning.
How are
How
you?
are you?
Great. How are you doing?
Where's your,
Collar?
excuse me? Excuse me?
I rarely wear my
Are
collar.
you in absentia or?
No,
Oh,
just
I
just
guess,
you know,
okay.
just white male privilege, and just saying I don't need to wear it. Make it up. There's some truth.
Hey, you better watch it, young man.
I know.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good to see you.
Oh,
I'm doing great. I'm doing really good. Thank you.
I'm so glad you're able.
Yeah, we're up here in your almost your home space.
Yep.
And I'm about 15 minutes from Mount Airy, North Carolina, honey. It's your Tar Heel country.
Is this where you've been quarantining? You and Sam have been there?
Well, we go back and forth, because we've got work in Alexandria, but we've been spending a lot of time up here. So, and North Carolina's opening, honey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
I need a haircut and, So how are things for you, though, in the church? Just same old, right? I love that Zoom.
That's right. You love hate with Zoom. Zoom had that kind of worldwide meltdown on Sunday, so that was not fun.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah.
I don't know if Pam can hear us or not. Pam, let me unmute you.
Yeah, I can hear you. Actually, I had a Zoom meeting this morning and my Zoom didn't work, so.
All right.
Wow.
Glad it's working. Pam, this is Susan Lukens. I don't know if you've met her. She was a guest of ours back in October.
Hi.
Hi, Susan. Nice to meet you.
Susan is
nice to meet you.
Is associate dean, is that it? Vice dean?
Yeah.
Vice dean of St. George's.
Whatever. I'm a friend of Greg's.
That too, yes. In this capacity, you're my friend, right?
Any friend of Greg's is a friend of mine. We are truly,
that's nice to hear. I agree.
We are truly blessed to have Greg.
Oh, go on.
Oh, remember we're working on you.
The first time I.
Go ahead. Oh, there's Barb.
So does Greg sing for you?
Yes.
Do you sing worship, Greg? Yeah, so the first time I met Greg, he was doing Wednesday Eucharist, noon Eucharist, and I walked in the little chapel and you were singing. I don't know if you remember this, Greg.
Really?
And I just thought, who is this? So, yeah. It must have been during maybe Advent or
in seminary. Right?
I was in America for no. You were at St. Paul's and you were leading Wednesday noonday Eucharist and you sang.
Oh, wow.
So that's the beginning of our. There you go.
I'm actually doing more singing in quarantine than I am in church because I'm not officiating at the same time, So we're putting together an evensong for Thursday nights, and I'm one of the voices. So anyway, Susan, you might remember Barb.
Yes, hi. That's we met.
How's it going?
Yes, nice to see you. Yeah, good to see you. How's Chicago doing?
We're hanging in there like everybody else.
Let me just grab one thing.
Yeah, it's I think my only solace is that time is passing, and now it's May, so things will be better. This is the only, whereas in March I was so forlorn. I don't know about you, but I was just, oh, this can't be happening. And now it's okay.
Well, I have a good
And how
friend.
are things in New Lenox?
Things are good. I have a good friend, Bernie, through church, Bernie Nash, who's 97, and he's actually in quarantine and hasn't been out of his room since March. So every day I think I'm going to complain. I think about at least I get out and go for a walk. He can't even, it's 23 steps from his window to his door. So I try to remember that. And
oh my gosh. That's exactly right. That you said it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Hey, Greg, how's your back today?
Much, much better. I had a great session with the chiro. I love this guy. He's like half my age, and he got all the therapies I could do. I was prodded with electrodes. It was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So I slept great.
Good. Good.
Anne, how are you?
Hi, everyone. Hi, Greg. I'm fine. I guess I didn't hear the demo. What happened to your back?
On Saturday, I threw out my back.
How did you do that?
Ooh.
No idea. I just woke up that way. I have a disc out of place is what it was. So I've been doing some aggressive therapy and treatment to get the disc back in place. So
How do you know
that's what the chiropractor said.
will you be going for a, will you have an appointment with an orthopod?
Not an orthopod, just a chiropractor.
Okay.
It was good.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Mary.
Yes.
Yay.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm still
Good morning.
fiddling with this. I'm not sure. So I have to ask.
You're great.
Yeah.
You're good.
I'm making sure everybody, so mostly for Susan's sake, that she's got everybody's names correct on here. And Barbara.
Yes, I
Mary?
see there.
Mary,
Mary.
it's perfect. I can, we can see you. It's a great angle. We can hear you.
Great.
I just talked with Rita, and she will not be joining us for Bible study. There is a nun that's in a tremendous amount of pain, and so Rita is going over to take her to the doctor. So she wanted us to lift up Joan Clare, Sister
Okay.
Joan Clare.
Mm.
And I asked her if she would be wearing a mask and gloves, and so would Sister Joan Clare, and she said yes. So
Mm.
if we could lift her up for prayer.
Thank you.
And Pam, how is your? I saw that Charlie died. How are your friends?
They're doing okay. The grandma is doing a little bit better than the grandfather. But the outpouring of sympathy for the parents and the grandparents is unbelievable. And so it's going to be a long road here.
Oh, sure.
But thank you so much for asking, and please keep them all in prayer. Greg,
I am.
maybe at another time you could bring Susan up to date on
Oh, I will.
with Charlie.
Okay.
Susan
Yeah.
knows how it goes. It's just, there's all kinds of parish things going on, and
Of course.
yeah, we've just had a lot rollicking our community lately, which is hard. So
Yeah.
Is that related to the virus or just in general?
No, separate, believe it or not.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Friends, before I pray us in, I just want to welcome again Susan Lukens, who's the Vice Dean of St. George's College in Jerusalem, which at some point in the future, we're not sure when, we will
Yeah.
be pilgrims to.
Yeah.
And Susan was our guest at Grace back in October, and is also a dear friend of mine. So she just wanted to just join the fun. That's all. That's your only reason for being here, right? And love.
That's my only reason.
Love
It's
the
so
Bible.
nice.
Love us. That's
It's
great.
nice to be back in New Lenox.
That's right.
Nice to meet you, Susan.
I'll catch us up to speed in a second, but for right now, the Lord be with you.
And also with
And
you.
also with you.
Let us pray. Blessed Lord, who caused all holy scriptures to be written for our learning, grant us so to hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that we may embrace and ever hold fast the blessed hope of everlasting life, mindful most especially of the privilege it is to be alive and be healthy and be able to read the Bible together with fresh eyes. We're mindful also of all those in our midst who are grieving or dealing with some sort of loss or illness. Especially today, we lift up in prayer Sister Joan Clare, our dear friend of Rita Travis. All of this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 Thank you.
All right, I brought some slides. So hopefully you can see my screen if you're on
Yeah.
if you're on a video. Great.
Mhm.
And we're going to get into a really interesting passage of Genesis today. But to catch you up to speed, we're going to go back a little bit on the flood. And let's see, can I get to the next screen? Yes, I can. Here we go. I just want to recap a little bit, do a little cleanup, as I like to say, of just some bigger points from the previous week, where we talked about the flood, affectionately known as Noah's Ark. And let me try a presentation here, actually. Bear with me, bear with me. Hey, that's more like it. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, good.
That's great. That's
Thank you.
better.
It's better.
Yeah.
There we go. So when we talk about Noah's Ark and the flood, we have to be mindful, as we've pointed out from the very beginning of studying Genesis, that there are 4 to 5 major traditions that are responsible for writing the Torah. And the Torah are the first 5 books of Genesis. First 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures, or what we call the Old Testament. There are also other writings in that time period, roughly 1600 BC. I hope I got that number right. There is a very famous book, epic poem called the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a great illustration when we study the Bible these days of just how all traditions, all societies, all tribes, if you will, all had their own origin stories and their own creation narratives. And they do kind of blend together and borrow from each other. And one of the future big examples of that is how even some of the narrative around Jesus's birth is echoed in the stories of Julius Caesar's birth. So just that. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, there are many gods, not one god as in our tradition. And in their story, the gods are bored with humans. They actually call them noisy, and they want to get rid of the humans. And so that's why they create a flood in that case. So slightly different version. But they want to obliterate humans except for one human being. And then later, when they see the devastation, this is a point I didn't get to make last week. When they see all the devastation that they did, they realize they went too far, T-O-O, sorry, and they decide to separate from humans and go, you know what, humans have to do this on their own. We can't involve ourselves in this because we're too powerful, we're too destructive. Now that has its echoes in our tradition, in our Bible, in the Hebrew Scriptures, but that separation happens earlier, and that happened back in the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve are banished from Eden. That's basically to say this boundary between humanity and divinity, we have to keep that boundary we have to keep that gulf much bigger and separate. Humans are just not capable of attaining that knowledge and that power of divinity, so we're going to keep it separate. Okay. And by the way, for everybody, you can always interrupt and ask a question if you're confused about something. No shame here. When we got to the flood story, it's the first time since the creation, with the slight exception of the Cain and Abel story, that God says, this is a disaster. This is not working. Let's start over. God, in Cain and Abel, if you remember, God is specifically talking to Cain and trying to figure out what went wrong. Here, God just says, effectively, I made a mistake. This is wrong. Let's start over. And like the Epic of Gilgamesh picks one person who's quote unquote righteous, and that is Noah. And of course, tangent to that is the idea of, is it so great to be the best of the rest, so to speak? We'll see. So we're just going to zoom in on 2 traditions. These are the same 2 traditions that are responsible for the 2 creation stories, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. In the J tradition, that's also called the Yahwist. And I didn't put it in here, but that, if you're trying to make the connection in your brain, this is the same school of authors that came up with the second story, the Garden of Eden story.
Okay.
In their perspective, there is a sinful human flaw. Humans are just sinful creatures. And no matter what kind of paradise you create, or perfect, beautiful world, humans are destined to mess it up. They will always, I even went harsher, screw it up. So that's always the point of view of the J or the Yahwist narrative. And that's one perspective of what's happening on the flood here. However, another perspective, and these two traditions are blended together to make the Noah Ark story. The P or priestly tradition, which is responsible for Genesis 1, the really orderly cosmic creation of the world, instead, there is cosmic corruption. The world, the earth, is just a broken place. And it's almost impossible for humans to ever keep up with it because the earth is always going to fail us. Let me just pause there. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay. So that leads to Noah. And in the Epic of Gilgamesh, like the Hebrew scriptures, in the midst of a flood, one human is chosen to be saved. And remember these 2 points from last week, that first of all, that narrative of someone being chosen out of many is going to happen all through scripture, culminating with Jesus Christ. And then it's also going to be critical to the identity of Israel from now until current day. And Susan, if you have reflections on this, I'd love to hear it too, because one of Susan's many contexts is being in the actual Holy Land, where there is still a very palpable tension, as old as time itself, that Israel feels chosen by God, and other traditions less so. But this is always going to be part of Israel's identity, and I do think it trickles down to modern times today. Do you want to say anything about that, Susan? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think living there as long as I did, I learned that words can be really hurtful, just a word. And the Palestinians with whom I lived and where Greg has been as well, they were the indigenous people. They are the indigenous people. They were there before Jesus. They were there always. And so just that word tribe and Israel is hurtful. So I really learned the power of listening, and that sometimes we say a word to each other and it brings up stuff, garbage, hurt. And so even the notion that Jewish people believe that they're the chosen ones and they're the tribe is very hurtful to the Palestinian, because when the Jewish people lived out that belief, and they're living it out today basically by saying all the land is theirs, that's hurtful to the people that were already there. And the second point, Greg, which I think is important for me to understand and everyone in this class this morning, is that Palestinians sometimes are misunderstood as Arabs and then not just assume they're Muslim. And that's not the case. The Palestinian groups that Greg and I know and have studied with them are Christians from way back, 2,000 years. And so, again, it's this identity of Israel as the chosen people. Have to be careful.
That's right.
Because in the land of the Holy One, Palestinians need to be included in that.
Yeah, that's right. So true. And you can extrapolate this if it's hard for any of you to relate on a personal level. I mean, I think you can see echoes of it in how colonial white Europeans took over the indigenous people of North America. So and this happens again and again, of somebody saying, I'm chosen, I'm the privileged one.
Right.
And we're going to see more of that momentarily, actually.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
My question is, when tourists come there, do they get any sense of this, or are they led to believe? I have a niece who went there with her husband, and when they came back, they gave me the same message. And I just wondered if tourists in general are schooled in this.
That's hard to say. I think it depends on who is your shepherd when you're there. And
Okay.
this is a good, definitely a plug for St. George's Jerusalem, which is an Episcopal college and place of education. But I've felt they took great pains to explain to us the nuances of Palestinian Israeli relationship. So, and that was the first time I'd ever heard this.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been working there since 2013. I was clueless. So
It depends
opening
really
our
on
space for new knowledge. And
yeah, it does depend on who is leading you. I think that
yeah,
you know, maybe even a different Christian tradition might look at it differently, you know. So
yes, yeah.
Stick with the Episcopalians. I think that's the rule. That's the rule today. Yeah.
I think we are this morning.
Yeah. Yes. Well, thank you, Susan. That was great. I always
welcome.
like to ask this question: what does it mean for God to be, or let's just say, be Almighty? When we say Almighty God, and oftentimes we think that means perfect in a way that makes no mistakes, has no regrets, all that. And this is my own. I'm just commending it to you. I think God is perfect in God's imperfection. And this is an early example of God going, I think I have some regrets about what I've done here in creation. And I think that is so beautiful. And I think taken on as comfort. I hope you do too. What I'm talking about is that God says at the end of chapter 8 that he is sorry, or she is sorry for the flood, and promises never to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
And as we're about to see, this skips ahead a little bit, it is sealed with a rainbow. So the rainbow becomes a symbol of forgiveness and a new covenant with the people. God saying, you know what? Not only will I never do this again, but I leave you this image as a lasting reminder of my promise to you. Now, I've mentioned before that one of the themes running through Genesis is that God will constantly re-enter. Things will go bad, and God will re-enter in covenant with us, and God will be aware that humans are not capable of keeping up their end of the bargain. And yet God always comes back to the table. Okay. I want to read this. Susan, you'll appreciate this. I'm sure you read it, actually. Friends, some of you have
wonderful.
Heard me quote my mentor, Ian Markham, the Dean of Virginia Seminary. He recently wrote this article reflecting on the Noah story, and I just read it a few days ago, and it's short enough that I can read the whole thing, and I just want to bring your attention to it. So let me read it to you now. I'll read from my phone. And he's reflecting on the pandemic and you know, the spread of disease and also the shelter in home and what this means for all of us. Certain stories become part of the furniture of culture. From the mystic of the rainbow to the survival of the animals on an ark, the Noah story is deeply embedded in American culture. We all know the extraordinary combination of judgment and survival captured in the story. So when nature, especially torrential rain, which we here have experienced the last 3 days, when nature, especially torrential rain, decides to exercise its power against humanity, our psyche finds itself reaching for the Noah story. In one of those perfect moments of serendipity, the historian Frank Snowden launched his latest book, Epidemics in Society, From the Black Death to the Present. Although he did not know that his book would appear in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is very prescient. In an interview with the Yale News on April 8th, Snowden explained that he sees a link between the environment and epidemics. The world we've created is so populous, Snowden says, and also so unregulated and greedy that we enormously invaded the habitat of wild animals. That is putting extraordinary pressure on them. So human beings are forcibly brought into contact with species that may be reservoirs of an extraordinary range of diseases that human populations have never encountered before. For Snowden, epidemics are nature pushing back. It is as if the pandemic is the world's way of judging the excess and greed of humans. As major predators, we are too dominant. The world needs rebalance. Our ecosystem needs adjusting. Humans are just too powerful, and nature is insisting that we stop our unbridled expansion. In the Noah story, the flood is God's judgment on human sin. The phrase sin captures our propensities for egotistical indifference to all around us. And so the drama unfolds. God starts over. Working with the one righteous person on the planet, each species of animal is saved and creation is renewed. For those who see in this pandemic nature pushing back and judging human sin, we have a secular Noah story. It is not divine judgment, but environmental judgment. Our inability to cooperate with nature is being exposed. We are being judged by nature for our sin. It is always difficult to judge the significance of a historic moment when we are living through it. We do not know how this will end. We do not know how many people will be infected by COVID-19, nor the number of fatalities. We do not know if this will bring about enduring change or just be a temporary inconvenient season. We can only guess about the judgment of history on this moment. However, engaging with contrasting narratives is helpful. A narrative that sees this pandemic as the judgment of nature deserves our attention. It is one of many narratives out there. There is a narrative around the sin of globalization that says we are too interconnected. And it is not surprising that disease travels effortlessly around the globe. There is a narrative that sees the pandemic as a reminder that utopian dreams are an indulgence of American capitalism and needs to remain our focus. And so the narratives emerge. There is often partial truth in these narratives. We should pause and listen to these different perspectives and see what insights we gain. And so I listened to our secular Noah narrative. There is a strand in the Christian tradition that has often seen judgment in terms of self-inflicted judgment. So for example, it is not that God sends us to hell, but that a life lived without love at its core becomes a self-inflicted hell. Understood this way, there is wisdom in the secular Noah narrative. We are flattening the pandemic curve. Next, we will work on flattening the climate change curve. And we all need to become Noahs for our time, setting out to work in harmony with nature, not against it.
Wow.
It's great perspective, I think. Any kind of thoughts or reactions, anyone, before we move on? It's just,
I really like that narrative. I mean, being an environmentalist, I just never, this didn't form in my mind before.
yeah.
It is a whole,
Go ahead.
it is a whole different way to look at what we're experiencing now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I find myself looking at human-made problems sometimes, even as an example of the limits of our. There is kind of a sin there that the sin being we think we're God, you know.
Mm.
And the one that always remains powerful to me is the Challenger disaster, because that's the first one I really remember as a younger person. And I just remember, even at a young age, I had this understanding that there's limits to what we can do. Maybe we're racing, you know, to send up things into space that we haven't checked all the bugs first, you know, and now people are dead, and that continues to happen. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think it's I've heard the use of Noah's story as a parallel to what we're living now, but not in Ian's way. That I am certainly not a good steward of the environment all the time.
Right.
So I like the way he brings that in, and yet there's a hopefulness in what he says. That's
Sure.
the Ian that we know and love. No, it's really good. Very evocative.
Yeah. And if we can flatten the curve, which we're doing with mixed results, but we're doing it, people are wearing masks for the most part.
Yeah.
We can do this if we put our minds to it. And then, let's tackle bigger things after this is done. The things that aren't forcing immediate problems for us, like climate change, for example. So, well, we move on to yet another story that leaves a bit of a punch in your gut. Which is really kind of the origins of, I would say, racism. And that is these next couple chapters here as we finish up what's called the primeval history. Once again, would love to have somebody else read from their translation, but I'm reading this new translation by Robert Alter. He's done the whole Old Testament, and this just came out about 2 months ago.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
Yeah,
can you show it again?
I sure can.
Wow.
Hebrew Bible,
thank you.
Translation with commentary, Robert Alter. And Susan,
wow, thank you.
Our participants here are all looking at basically different translations of the Bible. That's going to come into play here with momentarily.
What's the name of it again?
Sure. It's called The Hebrew Bible by Robert Alter, A-L-T-E-R.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we're on chapter 9. I'll read for a little bit and just pause along the way. And so now, again, the flood is complete and it's time to come out. And God blessed Noah and his sons, and he said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And the dread and fear of you shall be upon the beasts of the field and all the fowl of the heavens, in all that crawls on the ground and all the fish of the sea. In your hand they are given, all stirring things that are alive. Yours shall be for food, like the green plants. I have given all to you. But flesh with its lifeblood still in it, you shall not eat. And just so your lifeblood I will require. From every beast I will require it. Requite it. And from humankind, from every man's brother, I will requite human life. He who sheds human blood, by humans his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made humankind. As for you, be fruitful and multiply, swarm through the earth and hold sway over it." And I'm just going to pause there and just say, mindful of Cain and Abel's complicated history, God is saying, have at it, but do not lay a hand on other human beings. And this will come back and just for good measure, he'll put it on stone tablets just to make sure we get the message. And God said to Noah and to his sons with him, "And I am about to establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the fowl and the cattle and every beast of the earth with you, all that have come out of the ark, every beast of the earth. And I will establish my covenant with you. Never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth." And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I set between me and you and every living creature that is with you for everlasting generations. My bow I have set in the clouds to be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. And so when I send clouds over the earth, the bow will appear in the cloud." That's the rainbow. "And I will remember my covenant between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters will no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will see it, to remember the everlasting covenant between God and all living creatures, all flesh that is on the earth." And God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth." Let me just pause there. Any particular lines or verses stick out to you hearing that? And particularly if you've got other translations, that's always fun. For me, I love that God says, "I will see my own rainbow," as if God's a little bit busy, can't quite remember all the things God done. God will take a peek over a cup of coffee in the morning and see the rainbow and go, "Oh, that's right. I promise." it is really sweet. It's supposed to be very heartwarming. You know, this is a very forgiving God now.
I'm looking at verse 6 and thinking about whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. This
Yeah.
part, for in the image of God made he man. And I mean, there's a connection there that's pretty big too. And I'm just thinking about it.
Yeah. I'm looking at my notes here just to see if there's anything on here, but you could read verse 6 as an eye for an eye a little bit. If you shed blood, your blood will be shed. That's certainly a theme throughout the Old Testament. That's a very ancient Israel concept. And we're still living with the ramifications of that. But I think more so the connection is if you lay a hand on a human, that's as if you're killing God. Because humans are in God's image. And, it's as if God, really like talking to children. You wouldn't want to hurt me, right? So don't hurt another human, because that's just as bad as hurting me.
And in my version, which is the Message,
yes,
it actually says, because God made humans in his image, reflecting God's very nature. So right there, it states it clearly.
Yeah, that's great. Let's see here. Okay. We're going to continue. Would someone like to read from there? Barb, actually, the Message might be interesting. Would you read from verse 18 to the end of the chapter?
Sure. The sons of Noah who came out of the ship were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These are the 3 sons of Noah. From these 3, the whole earth was populated. Noah, a farmer, was the first to plant a vineyard. He drank from its wine, got drunk, and passed out naked in his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw that his father was naked and told his 2 brothers who were outside the tent. Shem and Japheth took a cloak, held it between them from their shoulders, walked backwards, and covered their father's nakedness, keeping their faces turned away so that they did not see their father's exposed body. When Noah woke up with his hangover, he learned what his youngest son had done. He said, "Cursed be Canaan, a slave of slaves, a slave to his brothers. Blessed be God, the God of Shem, but Canaan shall be his slave." God prospered Japheth, living spaciously in the tents of Shem, but Canaan shall be his slave. Noah lived another 350 years following the flood. He lived a total of 950 years, and he died.
Okay, thank you. What the heck just happened? Has anyone heard this story before besides Susan and I?
Nope.
No.
No, this one, it's funny, this one never seems to make it into the children's stories, does it?
Or Hollywood, as far as that's
Or
concerned.
Hollywood, exactly. And on the image on screen is a painting of this. So, okay, well, let's unpack it for a little bit. The first important thing to know are Noah's 3 sons, and I'm going to show you some family trees in a second. So 3 sons: Shem, Ham, and Japheth. But the next important thing is what is going on with naked Noah, drunk naked Noah. In the Bible, we've already experienced this a little bit early on when I said the verb to know comes up, as in Adam knew Eve, which is a metaphor for they had sex, but they had it in a romantic way and produced children. There were other ways to talk about sexual intercourse that are a little bit more clinical, or not more clinical, transactional. Here, nakedness is a metaphor, also a euphemism for something sexual and something immorally sexual. It's not described exactly what's going on. A fair interpretation is that the sons accidentally found Noah and his wife in the midst of sexual intercourse, which is a no-no. It's also possible. I mean, this term is also these words for nakedness here are used elsewhere in the Bible, and I'm not sure where, to describe something incestual, like a mother and a son. So, you know, like in a warning sense, like do not do this. So something happens that is shameful, and yet the blame falls on Ham, because Ham is the one who sees it, and that's, according to this story, that's the violation. Okay, does that make sense, everybody?
Mm.
So somehow Ham gets the blame here and the shame. Now the problem is there's a curse that comes out of this. All right, and Canaan. Just know that Canaan's not a good place. And when we're talking about ancient cultures, especially ones that are telling their story, their biblical story, let's use the words we were talking about earlier, like tribes, and every tribe, every person has an enemy. And when you want to tell your history or your story, and you want to talk about the origins of your enemies, you do not want to tell them in a way that shows any kind of favoritism to your enemy. You want to actually make your enemy look bad and shame them. So in the telling of the story, the enemies included the descendants of Ham. And so by telling this story, the story puts all the shame and all the blame. It implies something either incestual or something deviant about Ham, so that connotation is stuck with Ham and all his descendants from that point on. Now, it gets even more gut-punching when you find out where the descendants of Ham moved to. And I'm going to try to move my screen here to show it. And this is, by the way, what we're calling Noah's Curse. I don't know if you can see that you should be able to see that on the screen. An older book that talks about it, that there is a curse of sorts put on Ham in this story that is meant to explain why the descendants of Ham are not only our enemy, but they are repulsive or deviant, that kind of thing. If you're wondering who the descendants of Ham are, you're not going to like this. They are African.
Oh, wow.
So if you see on this map, you see where the descendants of Shem are going to end up being, and various other tribes. And then you see Ham on the left side of your screen, which is basically Egypt and modern-day Ethiopia. When we get to the Moses story, for example, who are the enemy? The Egyptians, right?
Yeah.
You can take this far further into more recent centuries and say there's this connotation that there's something subhuman or shameful about any of Ham's descendants, who would be the populations in Africa. And there we have this real powerful and yet terrifying connotation that that there's something wrong about these people, and that it's embedded in Israel's history of themselves, that this is there's an imbalance there. And certainly that applies to what Susan was talking about earlier about Palestinians as well, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think, Greg, you've really brought up a good notion that I think is hard, at least for me as an American, to embrace, but I've lived overseas now for a long time, is this notion of tribe. Yeah. Like New Lenox is a tribe, and you're not in the tribe yet, Greg, because you didn't grow up there.
Right.
So, I don't know, you're from somewhere, but it's not like this tribe. Like, you're really a Tar Heel, you're from North Carolina. That's your tribe. But we don't think that way, I don't think, in America. But in this ancient history, and certainly in the Middle East today, it's tribal.
It's tribal. Still
like,
tribal.
What's your tribe? I introduce you and you're a Tar Heel. Like, that's your tribe. I wouldn't say that, but if you were in Israel, you would. Where are you from?
Right.
I would say that.
You would?
Yeah.
Sarah is also she's not a Tar Heel, she's a Blue Devil.
Oh.
You know what though, Greg? I do have a degree from UNC.
I know, I often forget that. When I tell my history, I neglect to explain that you're also a Tar Heel. Yes.
Okay.
I bleed deep blue.
That's right. Here on this screen, just taking
Can I interrupt for just a second? Nancy?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the Bible that Barb read from, so different, the wording.
Yep.
And so what Bible are you reading from, Barb?
It's called The Message. It's the Bible in contemporary language.
Oh, okay, got it.
It's by,
go ahead, Barb.
it's by Eugene H. Peterson, Peterson. I think Susan Walker also has this one.
That's right.
Because
That
the thing that sticks out to me is the harsher wording in your Bible, and they never call it the ark; they call it the ship.
Interesting.
Greg,
In yours, Barb, they call it the ship.
Yes, Susan.
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I dug out of the bookcase was my father-in-law's The Living Bible, large print edition,
Yep.
Oh, I like that.
which is a compilation of previously published living letters, living prophecies, living gospels, living psalms and proverbs, and all of them. But there's a footnote here that after, in verse 18, where it talks about Ham as the ancestor of the Canaanites, there's a footnote in this one that it says Ham was not the ancestor of the Negro as was once erroneously supposed.
Oh, there you go.
Oh.
So it still continues the misinformation. That's right. But I do think a lot of people connotate Africa with Ham, even though they're not necessarily, it's not quite the African American per se. Now, that's not the only tribe also that Israel has beefs with. There are others, Moabites, for example, Amorites, and they'll have their turn later. But that's at the very least what's going on in this passage is an origin story of the enemy, and a not pleasant one either. On your screen, you can see a little recap of a family tree that we've breezed through in the last 10 chapters, starting with Adam. And we're following the line from Seth. Remember, Seth is the child that replaced Abel, who was killed. And then it goes all the way down to Noah. And then let me move to the next screen. And they're here at the top of the screen are Noah's children, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And I know you're wondering what about Shem and Japheth? Well, Shem is going to be the ancestor of basically the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob tradition, which leads to Jesus.
Oh.
My screen is blocking. Yeah, the very bottom would be where, there in green, if you're not colorblind, Jesus's birth stems from Shem. So just so you know how this stands, that's what's happening there. Fascinating. Oh, we're not at the Tower of Babel yet. Okay, I'm gonna read chapter 10 is a genealogy, and I think I mentioned last time, the genealogies are not there to frustrate you or to test you on your pronunciation. The genealogy is part of storytelling in ancient times. This is just how you lend authenticity to the stories. You pause and you say, here's how everyone is connected. These are very important. This was them putting down in writing how they all were connected, how the writers, how they connected to Adam all the way back through Noah. So wish me luck. I'm going to read through this because we are promising to read the whole thing. So here we go. And then we'll get to the Tower of Babel, and I think we'll be done for the day. Here we go. And this is the lineage of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer and Magog and Madai and Javan and Tubal and Meshech and Tiras, and the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz and Riphath and Togarmah. And the sons of Javan, Elisha and Tarshish, the Kittites and the Dodanites. From these, the sea peoples branched out. These are the sons of Japheth. In their lands, each with their own tongue, according to their clans and their nations. And the sons of Ham, Cush, and Mizraim, and Put, and Canaan. And the sons of Cush, Seba, and Havilah, and Ramah, and Sabteka. And the sons of Ramah, Sheba, and Dedan. And Cush begot Nimrod. He was the first mighty man on earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The start of his kingdom was Babylon, and Erech, and Akkad, all of them in the land of Shinar. From that land Ashur emerged, and he built Nineveh, and Rehoboth-ir, and Calah, and Rezin, between Nineveh and Calah, which is the great city. And Mizraim begot the Ludites, and the Anamites, and the Lehabites, and the Naphathites, and the Pathrosites, and the Casalites, and the Caphtorites, from whom the Philistines emerged. Philistines are not good, according to the Hebrews. And Canaan begot Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusite, and the Amorite, and the Girgashite, and the Hivite, and the Arkite, and the Sinite, and the Arvidite, and the Zemarite, and the Hamathite. Afterward, the clans of the Canaanites spread out. And the border of the Canaanite was from Sidon till you come to Gerar, as far as Gaza, till you come to Sodom and Gomorrah, and Adam and Zeboim, as far as Lasha. These are the sons of Ham, according to their clans and their tongues, in the lands of their nations. Sons were born too to Shem, the father of all the sons of Eber, the older brother of Japheth. The sons of Shem, Elam, and Asur, and Arpachshad, Arpachshad, and Lud, and Aram. And the sons of Aram, Uz, and Hul, and Gether, and Mash. And Arpachshad begot Shelah, and Shelah begot Eber, and to Eber 2 sons were born. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was split apart, and his brother's name was Joktan. And Joktan began Almodad, and Sheleph, and Hazamaraveth, and Jerah, and Hadaram, and Uzal, and Diklah, and Obal, and Abimael, and Sheba, and Ophir, and Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. And their settlements were from Mesha till you come to Sephar in the eastern highlands. These are the sons of Shem according to their clans and their tongues in the lands of their nations. These are the clans of the sons of Noah according to their lineage in their nations. And from these the nations branched out on the earth after the flood. And we get to chapter 11 there. And another thing to think of, if you think of it like a movie, that is the montage. The passage of time is what the genealogy does too. So now we catch up and we pause and we zoom in on the people of Earth at this point, and we get to this very famous, beautiful story. Would anyone like to read from a different translation, chapter 11, basically 1 to 9? Anyone have a different translation, maybe?
I can read out of this
Oh, good.
Living Bible.
Great. Thanks, Susan.
At that time, all mankind spoke a single language. As the population grew and spread eastward, a plain was discovered in the land of Babylon and was soon thickly populated. The people who lived there began to talk about building a great city with a temple tower reaching to the skies, a proud eternal monument to themselves. This will weld us together, they said, and keep us from scattering all over the world. So they made great piles of hard-burned brick and collected bitumen to use as mortar. But when God came down to see the city and the tower mankind was making, he said, "Look, if they are able to accomplish all this when they have just begun to exploit their linguistic and political unity, just think of what they will do later. Nothing will be unattainable for them. Come, let us go down and give them different languages so that they won't understand each other's words." So in that way, God scattered them all over the earth, and that ended the building of the city. That is why the city was called Babel, meaning confusion, because it was there that Jehovah confused them by giving them many languages, thus widely scattering them across the face of the earth.
Beautiful. Thank you. Simple, short, brief story that makes for beautiful paintings like the one you see on the screen. And there's nothing more complicated to it than just saying it's another example of what we were talking about earlier, of just humans going beyond their reach and God saying, hey, time out. There's some boundaries here. And it's also a way for Israel to write into their story, how do we account for all these tribes having different languages? Well, clearly we did something wrong and caused God to cause this to be. And so Babel, the Hebrew word Babel, becomes in English Babel. In fact, my translation says, therefore it is called Babel, for there the Lord made the language of all the earth, Babel, B-A-B-B-L-E. And that is basically the origin story of why we speak in different languages. Any thoughts?
Greg,
on this? Yeah.
Greg, I have a question. It's a little off. I remember when I took one of your classes, you talked about how when the bishop, if I remember correctly, when the bishop is ordained, they can trace the lineage all the way. Is that all the way? I saw on the chart that when you did, so Shem, and that's Melchizedek.
Oh, yeah. No, not that far.
Oh, okay.
Good question. The bishop lineage, the apostolic succession, goes all the way to St. Peter.
Oh, okay. Sorry, guys.
Which you could then say goes to Jesus, which I guess you could then say goes all the way back to here. But as far as modern humanity, post 0 BC, that's where it traces back to.
Oh, okay.
Laid on hands, go back to Peter. Yep. But Barb, you're onto something, which is that, we still to this day we contextualize our own current experience based on who our parents were and, our family trees, our genealogies. Now we do blood tests to see exactly who our relatives are. Mm-hmm. The church does that too. I mean, there's a pride, I think, among bishops that they are who was part of their consecration and who consecrated them, and goes all the way back. It's a part of it's a sense of pride, but it's a sense of kind of adoption into a lineage in many ways.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, good point. This is a non-sequitur, but Susan, I'm so excited about Hosem becoming bishop. Isn't that great? Oops, hold on, you're muted. There you go. Try it again.
She's still muted.
Sorry. Hey, there you go.
So Hosam is a good friend of Greg and I, and he is an example of a Palestinian Christian. So he was born and raised in Nazareth, but his lineage, his tribe, is always from the Holy Land, always. They're the original Palestinian Christians from 2,000 years ago. Anyway, he studied at the same place that Greg and I studied, and he's just marvelous. He's wonderfully warm and smart and funny, and just, I love him to death, but he gives a really breath of freshness to that land that struggles so for equality, because Hosam is young, and he'll bring the possibility, don't you think, Greg, of conversation that is bright and has brainstorming and collaborative, because he's young. He's probably, 46, 47, and he'll be bishop for a long, long time. And it's, Greg, I think you agree with me, it's kind of unusual, especially in the Middle East, to have such a young bishop.
Yeah.
It was a very contested, election. But the point is that in this story with Noah, here's an example of someone that's going to make a big difference in the world. And he is very tribal. I mean, he will first say to you, I'm a Palestinian. Mm-hmm. And then his label is, I'm a Christian. Yeah. So, so we're all very excited that he won the election. And I'll tell you a funny story. So the election was in Jordan because some of the Jordanian Christians are not allowed to travel to Israel. So, Wadia, who also was a student at Virginia Theological Seminary, and Greg knows him, is like my Palestinian Jordanian son. So I made him, during the election process, call me from like the hallway in the restroom, because I was dying to know what was happening, Greg. I'm like, wait, I gotta know. And what? And I'm like, Wadia, you're gonna call me? He goes, sure. I go, well, don't get in trouble. He goes, no, I'll call you. Yeah. So end of story. End of story. He's elected on the second ballot.
All right. So
the next day, I call the Cathedral Close in Jerusalem, where I lived for a long time, and someone in the diocesan office answered the phone, and it was Jamil, the current bishop's chauffeur. And I didn't know if he knew. So I didn't want to, make a big deal of it, but I already knew. And I said, well, hey, how are you doing, Jamil? We're friends. I go, did you know? And he goes, Susan, I knew the minute it happened. And I looked at him, I said, do I need to know how you found out? Because I'm not going to tell you how I found out. But it really talks about this idea of tribes. Everything is connected. There's no telling how Jamil found out, but it's about tribal life. It's like Greg's a Tar Heel. And in the end, when there's a fuss about Greg Milliken, he's going to go back to his roots and get some help because he's a Tar Heel. So it's a really, there it is.
So as you're all, just to kind of wrap a bow on it, what we're talking about is actually I know Tom's younger brother better. He was my classmate.
Yeah, Ferris. Yeah.
Well, Sam is the dean of the cathedral in Jerusalem, which is Episcopal again. And just talk about Babel, the Tower of Babel, and the need to communicate in different languages and different peoples. That St. George's is right at the heart of that,
Boy, they are. You go to they've had over the years many ecumenical services, and sometimes you'll go to worship there and you hear German, English, French, some Slavic languages, and then there'll be Asians there. It is the Tower of Babel, and they're all there to worship. So that's quite beautiful.
And I would, to really put a bow on it, especially as we're right around the corner from Pentecost, where language and confusion is about to come back. The kind of symbiosis between Tower of Babel, where language gets confused, and then Pentecost, where suddenly the disciples can now understand the other languages. That relationship is just so critical to our identity as Christians.
Yeah.
That we, through God, through the Holy Spirit, we're going to find a way through in a world where everyone speaks different languages and has different agendas and different clans and tribes. We will, with God's help, as we say, I will with God's help, we'll get through this together.
God.
What a great way to end, right?
Yeah, thank you, Father.
Thank you.
This was so fun. Thank you so much, Susan. You're always welcome back.
Oh, it's lovely to be with your tribe. I love it. I'll see you next week. And
I may be the only one in New Lenox in this tribe. I think everyone else is in Mokina and Frankfurt. Yeah.
But the one gift of this is that you realize that I don't know all of you that well, but you've invited me into your homes. Yep. The first time I'm meeting you, and that's the gift of Zoom. Yeah. So thank you for that privilege. Wonderful. And I'll see you next week.
Greg.
Yes, Susan.
Funny story. For about 10 years, I was traveling all over the state of Illinois as a regional director and then around the country. And I found that with my downtime, I could almost always find an Episcopal church having a service or something going on. Yeah. And I would just go over there because I knew all of the signs and symbols and signals, and I was part of it.
That's the fun part of being in St. George's, is they'll do it in Arabic, and you still know kind of where you are.
Yeah.
You know it well.
Yeah.
Well, I was in seminary, so I know really well, but yeah. Well, friends, if you want to stay on here, we're going to do noonday prayer in a few moments.